Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'll be covering an iceberg about the state of Ohio. This one was different. The opening tiers had a large amount of entries about sports, while the lower tiers had more topics covering historical events. For those that don't know, an iceberg is a chart that collects information, divided into multiple tiers. As we go down this quote-unquote iceberg of information, it transitions from more well-known entries and begins to go deeper into a subject. I'll be immediately going down to the second tier so that we can quickly get to the weirder stuff. The link to the original iceberg is available in the description. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting me by subscribing. Let's start. The burning of the Cuyahoga River. The Cuyahoga River caught fire in the summer of 1969. It was heavily polluted from the runoff of multiple factories that had been in the area for almost a century. The fire occurred on June 22nd in 1969 and lasted for about half an hour before a fireboat and emergency responders arrived on the scene to put it out. It damaged a few railroad bridges, but was put out quickly before anyone could visually record the event. No one in the local community gave the event that much thought. It happened many times before. However, newspapers and magazines like National Geographic and Time would publish articles about the polluted river. This drew so much press that it directly influenced Congress's decision to establish the EPA and led to the first Earth Day, in which around 1,000 students protested and marched to the Cuyahoga riverbank. Oil slicks had been catching fire on the river since the late 1860s. However, this one incident kickstarted an overhaul of America's approach to regulation on pollutants. Iroqois. This is one of the more well-known Native American tribal groups. Their name means rattlesnake, and originated from their rivals, the Algonquins, who compared the Iroquois' stealthy ambushes to the approach of a lethal snake. They were a collection of 5 separate tribes that shared a common language, with their name referring to the language they spoke. Cleveland Metroparks. Also called the Emerald Necklace, the Cleveland Metroparks are a network of 18 parks with over 300 miles of hiking trails, covering an area of around 23,000 acres. It has Edgewater Beach and the Metroparks Zoo, along with lots of other outdoor accommodations and activities. Cincinnati Chili. This particular version of chili uses cinnamon, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, and sometimes coca powder, in contrast to the spicier stuff present in traditional red chili. OH. This chant is commonplace throughout Columbus, Ohio, and throughout the state. It's said to have been first seen in an Ohio State, Indiana, college football game in November 1947. Toledo. This town is located in the northwestern part of the state. It's called Glass City for its history being a center for glass manufacturing. It was also the birthplace of the Jeep, with the first Jeep being manufactured in the city in 1941. It's also known for its great zoo and the Anthony Wayne Bridge. Akron. This city is known to be the former home of an inventor named Charles Maish. He, along with his brother Frank, are accredited for inventing the waffle cone in 1904. The city is also the birthplace of LeBron James and the town where the band The Black Keys was formed. In addition, the nation's first police car was assigned to Akron. Dayton. This town is the birthplace of the cash register, the stepladder, the pull-top can, Cheez-Its, the barcode, and is also the hometown of the Wright brothers. In addition, the world's first speeding ticket was given by the Dayton Police Department in 1904. The person they caught had been going 12 miles an hour on West 3rd Street inside of the city limits. Youngston. Youngston is located in eastern Ohio, close to the border with Pennsylvania. It was a center for industrial production in the early 20th century. It's known for the Butler Institute of American Art, which is a museum dedicated solely to American artists, and Mill Creek Park, which became the first park district in Ohio in 1891. Canton. Canton is called the birthplace of the NFL and is the home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It's also the home of the William McKinley Presidential Library, Museum, and National Memorial. Sandusky. A former industrial port town, Sandusky was once a part of the Underground Railroad. Former slaves would often take ships from Sandusky on the southern shore of Lake Erie to escape to Canada. Paul Brown. Paul Brown was the founder and first head coach for the Cleveland Browns and Cincinnati Bengals in the early years of the NFL. He led the Cleveland Browns to 7 title leagues in 12 years before going on to found the Bengals. He coached there from 1968 to 1975, leading the Bengals to the postseason playoffs 3 times. He would then become a general manager for the Bengals, helping them to reach the Super Bowl twice in the 1980s. He's credited for pioneering the draw play, film study, and face masks for helmets. He also included the first African American players in a pro sports team in 1946. Woody Hayes. Hayes was the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes team from 1951 to 1978. The Buckeyes won 5 national titles and 13 Big Ten Conference games under his leadership. Hayes was also an associate professor at the college and would assist in teaching military history at the school during the off-season. Many presidents have been born in Ohio. 7 presidents have been born in the state. These presidents are Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Harrison, McKinley, Taft, and Harding. Jim Brown. Brown was a running back for the Cleveland Browns, collecting 12,312 rushing yards and 15,459 combined net yards during his career. He played from 1957 to 1965. Brown became an actor and starred in over 50 movies and television shows from 1964 to 2014. He went on to found the Black Economic Union, an organization designed to help African American entrepreneurs. He also participated in the Cleveland Summit in June 1967, in which he and other prominent African American athletes met to interview Muhammad Ali after Ali took a stand against the Vietnam draft. They deliberated on whether to publicly support his act. They chose to support his cause. Brown would go on to found Amer I Can, an organization that aimed to help at-risk youths and gang members achieve their academic potential to become more effective citizens. Pete Rose. Rose was a pro baseball player who earned the title Player of the Decade from the Sporting News in the 1970s and would break the record for career hits in 1985. He became infamous for his gambling habits and was banned from the MLB in 1989 for betting on his own team, the Cincinnati Reds, while still a manager for them. He was fined and forced to serve 5 months in jail in 1990. Archie Griffin. Griffin was a Ohio State tailback who led his team to a 10-1 record in 1974. He went on to play for the Bengals for 8 years. War of 1812. Ohio was on the front lines of the war between Britain and the United States. The settlers living in Ohio regularly had to deal with raids from the British-backed Indian tribes. Marathon Oil Company. This business's headquarters is in Findlay, Ohio. Marathon Oil Company was originally founded in Lima, Ohio, in 1887. Christmas Story House. The producers of the movie A Christmas Story were looking for a home that looked like it was out of a Midwestern steel town in the 1940s. The location they picked to start filming was located in the Tremont neighborhood of Cleveland. It was bought by a fan of the film in 2004, and he elected to renovate the house and decorate it like it was in the movie. You can currently go see the house for yourself. A pair of homes across the street were also bought and made into a museum and gift shop. Superman was created in Cleveland. Both of the original creators of Superman came from the Glenville neighborhood in Cleveland. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the sons of Jewish immigrant families, made the character while attending high school. The Toledo War. I've covered disputes between states in this series before. Ohio has its own territorial war. The Toledo War occurred in 1835, when Ohioan settlers began to survey the disputed border between their state and Michigan. Ohio was a state at the time, but Michigan was still a territory, trying to become a state. The boundaries between the two remained undefined, sparking a confrontation over a piece of land called the Toledo Strip. A posse of Michiganites surprised a group of surveyors and captured them. They were charged with violating the Pains and Penalties Act in the Michigan Territory's law book, which said that Ohioans found in the area between the two separate groups could be arrested and put into prison without a trial. A few of the surveyors evaded capture and made it back to Ohio to tell what had happened. Later that year, a deputy sheriff from Michigan arrived in the town of Toledo to arrest an Ohio man who had violated the act. The Ohio man resisted and stabbed the officer. The deputy recovered, but the enmity between Ohio and Michigan began to escalate. Conflict continued throughout the year until President Jackson fired the territorial governor of Michigan and replaced him with a man who was supportive of giving the Toledo Strip to Ohio. A deal was struck, with Ohio gaining that piece of land in exchange for Michigan gaining statehood and the Upper Peninsula. Hang On Sloopy. This song is played at a lot of Ohio State games. My Girl Sloopy was a 1964 song by the rhythm and blues band, The Vibrations. A band called the McCoys would cover the song in 1965, and an Ohio State student named John Tatkenhorst heard their version at the state fair in 1965. He was a student in the percussion section and saw that it could be arranged for a marching band. He received permission from his professor and arranged the song for his band in only 5 hours. It would debut during an Ohio game on October 9th, 1965, only a week after the song hit number 1 on the charts. It was a hit, and the students continually asked the band to play their version of the cover. It's remained a part of Buckeye's culture since then. Passenger Pigeon. The story of the passenger pigeon's extinction has been a cautionary tale for many years. The last wild passenger pigeon was taken out in Ohio in 1900. A single captive flock was maintained in the Cincinnati Zoo, but a series of failed breeding programs resulted in the last living pigeon, a female named Martha, passing away in 1914. Cleveland Indians name change. The former Cleveland Indians altered their name to the Guardians in 2021, in the midst of a massive push to alter the names of sports teams. This was the same year in which the Washington, D.C. football team altered their name. The team had a caricature of a chief as their mascot for a long time, and the lobbying to retire the team mascot and name was finally accepted after years of campaigning. Buckeye Dessert. These candies are balls of peanut butter and fudge, dipped in chocolate. My research said that they're delicious and also relatively easy to make. Dotting the I. The privilege of dotting the I in the Ohio, formed by the Ohio State Marching Band during the halftime show, is an honor reserved for college students in the sousaphone section, entering their 4th year of college. The dotting of the I is the final part of the marching band's formation of the word Ohio. Some other people outside the section have been allowed to dot the I in the past. These include Coach Woody Hayes and the astronaut John Glenn. The fumble, the drive, the shot, and the block. All of these football occurrences originate from teams within the state. Hastily made Cleveland tourism video. This video, along with its follow-ups, were released over a period of 2 weeks on YouTube in April 2009. They were made by the Cleveland comedian Mike Polk and went on to collect millions of views. One of the primary selling points in Polk's second video is, quote-unquote, "Cleveland, we're not Detroit." It, along with its accompanying song, were used as a role model for other fake tourism videos for other cities throughout the U.S. The Cleveland Tourism Board was not happy with Polk, later deciding to make a contest challenging Cleveland residents to make their own hastily made videos without the satirical content in Polk's. Ohio State Quarter. This is the Ohio State Quarter. It's pretty cool. Quaker Oats Company. Quaker Oats was established in 1886 in Akron when the town was a milling center. You can see the place where the original silos once stood today in the downtown area of Akron. Ohio train derailment. A train carrying vinyl chloride had an accident in the town of East Palestine in February 2023. An overheated wheel bearing caused the train to derail, releasing vinyl chloride, an odorless and extremely flammable gas, all over the countryside. This gas can cause headaches, lung irritation, and disorientation, and is lethal at high levels of exposure. The train cars holding this gas began to burn, causing experts to worry that an explosion was going to take place. The train was also carrying other flammable chemicals, and these spilled out and began to contaminate local creeks and streams, causing massive ecological damage. People in the area began to complain about experiencing nausea, headaches, and rashes. The government quickly moved in, and the CEO of Norfolk Southern, the company who were operating the train, moved to reform their approach to safety. Over a year later, cleanup in the area is still ongoing. Trilobite. A quarry in Sylvania, Ohio, remains one of the most useful fossil recovery sites in the Midwest. The quarry used to be owned by the coolest sounding stone company I've ever heard, Medusa Stone Company. That would be a cool band name. The quarry operated for many years, and the fossilized remains of Devonian age sea creatures were used as driveway gravel and road fill. Today you can go see the fossilized remains of long dead sea creatures, but it requires an invitation. Wes Craven. Best known for films like The Hills Have Eyes, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Scream, Craven was born in Cleveland. Hopewell Furnace. This former iron plantation dates back from the 18th century. The 848-acre property had facilities dedicated to the production of iron, and was operated by both slaves and free men. It played a great role within the American War for Independence, with the ironsmiths there crafting 115 large cannons for the Continental Navy. Today, it's a historical site that can be seen in French Creek State Park. However, this place is located in Pennsylvania, not Ohio. Not really sure what it's doing here. Roy Lietchenstein. Lietchenstein is best known for his distinctive style that imitates pop art. He was born in New York City, but went on to enroll and then teach at Ohio State. Polish Boy. This has been named one of the top 10 hot dogs in the world. Native to Cleveland, this style features a kielbasa sausage covered in fries, barbecue, and coleslaw. Millionaire's Row. A large stretch of Euclid Avenue in Cleveland was once the home of famous industrialists and businessmen. Cleveland was the nation's sixth most populous city in 1910, and many millionaires made their home there. Famous families like the Rockefellers once lived along the avenue. Several of these great homes were demolished in the 1930s to make space for commercial buildings, and by the 1950s, almost all of the homes were destroyed to make space for the new Innerbelt Freeway. Carl Stokes. Stokes is best known for being the first African American man to serve as an elected mayor for a major city. He served the city of Cleveland from 1968 to 1971 and was one of the many people who brought attention to the Cuyahoga River fire mentioned earlier in the Iceberg. Enabling Act of 1802. This act took the eastern part of the Northwest Territory, named it Ohio, and made it a full U.S. state. Ohio Amish population. Ohio, as of 2024, has the second largest population of Amish in the U.S. Around half of the roughly 80,000 Amish in the state dwell in Holmes County, which is located between Columbus and Akron. Mistake on the Lake. This nickname was given to Cleveland in the 60s and 70s. This change in perception of the city stemmed from events like the Cuyahoga River fire, along with political turmoil and economic issues. The town had used the slogan, "Best Location in the Nation," throughout the 50s. However, a growing depression amongst many living in the city fueled the popularity of this new nickname. Chillicothe. This town's name means principal town in the Shawnee language, and was a trade hub for thousands of years before the arrival of the Europeans. It was once the state capital from 1803 to 1810, and then from 1814 to 1816. Key Tower. The Key Tower is a 57-floor skyscraper located in downtown Cleveland. It was designed by the architect Caesar Paley, who took visual cues from Egyptian obelisks to create the external parts of the tower. It's currently the tallest building in the Midwest, between Chicago and Philadelphia. Carmen, Ohio. This Ohio State song was made in 1902 by a college freshman. It is the oldest school song still in use. Intel Superfactory. This project, announced in January 2022, aims to build a massive semiconductor factory. The project is estimated to cost around $20 billion and would see 2 cutting-edge chip factories being built in Licking County. Construction should finish sometime in 2025. Intel's decision is the single largest private sector investment in the entirety of Ohio's history. Grandpa's Cheese Barn. The primary location of Grandpa's Cheese Barn is in Ashland, Ohio. The store is known for its extensive cheese collection. 10-cent Beer Night. This event has been covered extensively by other channels, so I'll do my best to give a summary. 10-cent Beer Night was an event in which the then Cleveland Indians did a promotion for their game against the Texas Rangers. It was June 4th, 1974, and the stadium managers offered beers for only 10 cents. Some 60,000 beer bottles were bought by the 25,134 people in attendance, and the audience quickly devolved into drunkenness. Bottles were thrown onto the field, and the violence escalated to the point that the Rangers forfeited the game. This was the only recorded forfeit in the entirety of the Texas team's history. Scott the Woz. This YouTuber is an Ohio native. He actually attended the University of Toledo earlier in his online career. Beaver Wars. This occurred in what is now present-day Ohio. In 1640, the Iroquois and Algonquin, who, as mentioned previously, were bitter rivals, fought over Ohio and the rest of the Great Lakes region. The Iroquois had worked hard to harvest beaver pelts in their territories to give to the European fur traders, and had almost completely eradicated their beaver population. They headed into the Ohio country and fought multiple other tribes for control of the trade market. A 60-year-long war took place between the Iroquois and their neighbors. In the end, all parties involved signed a peace treaty in 1701, called the Treaty of Grand Pe. In the end, the Iroquois drew closer to the British, leading to the events of the French and Indian War. Burger King foot lettuce. This refers to an image of a fast food worker who did exactly that. This image was immediately seen by Burger King, and the employee was quickly fired. The worker was formerly employed at Mayfield Heights, Ohio. This incident also spawned a popular meme. A channel called Top 15s included this incident in one of their videos about mysteries that were solved by 4chan users. The narrator's inflection and the background music he picked for the video were at odds, and that was quickly made into a meme. The Great Dayton Flood. This event ranks as the state's worst recorded natural disaster. The storm that led to the tragedy of the Dayton Flood was heralded by the arrival of 58-mile-an-hour winds on March 21st, 1913. The next day was Easter, and rain began to pour down over Dayton and the Great Miami River. It rained 11 inches over a 5-day period, and the river began to rise by 2 feet an hour as the downpour continued. Dayton, which was a city of 117,000 at the time, had endured several floods before. However, when the levees of the river broke, over 250,000 cubic feet of water was released, about 4 times as much as the daily flow of Niagara Falls. Over 65,000 people were displaced from their homes by the event, and almost $2 billion of damage in 2023 money was inflicted. The teak and mahogany desks of one shop, the Barney and Smith Car Company, were completely destroyed. Their remains were found as far down the river as New Orleans. In the end, the Great Flood also caused some 467 deaths throughout the state. The city eventually recovered, and the citizens raised over $2 million to help with future flood prevention projects. Cincinnati. This is slang for the region in and around Cincinnati. It's primarily used by those dwelling in the Cleveland metro area, and is a term that connects to the conservatism and traces of a southern accent that some in the city of Cincinnati possess. Harriet Beecher Stowe House. This woman is known for authoring Uncle Tom's Cabin. She was an advocate for women's suffrage and equal rights for all Americans. Her home can be viewed by the public in Cincinnati, Ohio. Cleveland Museum of Art. The collection of this museum contains over 66,500 pieces of art and spans some 6,000 years of human history. You can find everything from traditional African art to European postmodern abstract art and medieval prints. The burning of the Houses of Parliament by JMW and William Turner, and the Crucifixion of St. Andrew by Caravaggio are just a few of the many famous pieces present in the collection. LeBron James and Steph Curry were born in the same hospital. Both of these players were born at the Akron General Medical Center in Akron, Ohio, Their dates of birth are separated by around 3 years. Quote-unquote, flyover state. Ohio is on the list for states that are thought to be flyover states, places where planes tend to pass over instead of land. However, it's pretty low on the list. West Virginia, Kansas, and Mississippi are the most commonly flown over states. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This operational base near Dayton, Ohio, is very significant in aviation history. The Huffman Prairie Flying Field that lies within the base's confines was the place where the Wright brothers developed the first practical airplane in 1905. Cleveland Clinic Fire of 1929. This disaster began when some X-ray film in a part of the Cleveland Clinic Foundation's main building caught fire. A 100-watt light bulb heated up the material, releasing toxic vapor from the film and starting a fire. The fire department responded quickly, but 123 people were taken out and 92 others were injured. The city demanded investigation, and a reform in hospital safety began. Cleveland's emergency responders were issued gas masks as part of their kit, and a municipal ambulance service was established to help transport cases. This event led to a national reform in which hazardous materials were carefully stored and labeled, and fire safety standards improved. Charles Ramsey. Charles Ramsey was a Cleveland resident who was responsible for rescuing the lives of 3 women: Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight. These women had been held captive by a man named Ariel Castro. Castro kidnapped the women over the course of 2002 to 2004 and held them captive in the basement of his house on Seymour Avenue. While I won't get into the details of the event here, Castro was a horrendous individual who ended up earning a lifetime sentence, along with an additional 1,000 years in prison without parole for his past actions. Amanda Berry escaped the basement and was rescued by Charles Ramsey. Ramsey broke down the door leading into Castro's house, allowing Berry to escape. Ramsey called 911, and police arrived on the scene to free the other captives. Balloonfest, 86. This event was a fundraiser for United Way, a nonprofit involved with boosting education standards and health resources for low-income communities throughout the U.S. The organizers of the event planned to set the world record for the most helium balloons released simultaneously. The public square of Cleveland was filled with around 1.5 million balloons, ready for release, that had been inflated by groups of volunteers. Around 100,000 people were in attendance at the event. The balloons released, and the people shouted as the 1.5 million balloons floated upwards. A storm then hit the city, and winds reached gusts of up to 60 miles an hour. This strong wind began to push the balloons north out of the city, and a rainstorm brought many of them down. These falling balloons caused the Burke Lakefront Airport to close. The Coast Guard were trying to locate a pair of fishermen who had fallen off their boat in Lake Erie, but the falling balloons covered the lake's surface. This partially contributed to them being unable to find and rescue the 2 men. The balloons caused multiple traffic accidents and littered the streets of Cleveland. Balloons continued to wash ashore in bodies of water as far north as Ontario. In the end, the event organizers in the city were fined millions of dollars in damage to infrastructure and to the environment. The Great Black Swamp. This area used to cover a portion of the Midwest. This area was once an expanse of forest and marsh that extended for some 1 million acres. The area was eventually tamed by the turn of the 20th century and turned into farmland. Some stories I've read said that the initiatives that funded the draining of the swamp were partially caused by the Toledo War that I covered earlier. It said that the Ohio militia, en route to the border, were waylaid by the marsh and told the governor about this issue. He took note and began to start the petitions for future laws that would influence Ohio's decision to drain the swamp. Nowadays, many in the state are looking to reclaim parts of the swamp to help with the ecology of Lake Erie and the state as a whole. Fertilizer from the farmlands has been going into the lake, which is used as a source of water for several Ohio towns and cities, causing a massive bloom in algae that makes the water toxic. This initiative wants to remove that risk by restoring the swamp. Charles F. Brush. This inventor, born in Euclid Township in 1849, is best known for his coil-type dynamo, a device that is the predecessor of the modern power generator. He also invented the arc light, an older style bulb that was used to illuminate parts of the US and Europe in the Gilded Age. Maynard James Keenan. This guy is best known for being the singer and lead lyricist for bands like Tool, Pucifer, and A Perfect Circle. He was born in Ravenna, Ohio, and is well known for his roles in the music industry. He's also acted in films like Escape from LA, a film I actually covered in my Stories in a Future Now Past Iceberg, along with End of Watch and Resident Evil Afterlife. He also apparently served in the Army. I thought I'd include that considering his nonconformist image. He served for 2 years in the 80s and did so well that he was invited to attend West Point, the Army's premier service academy. He declined and eventually left. He has this to say about his view of serving in the military. Begin quote, "Human beings are capable, every one of us, of awful stuff against each other, to ourselves, and because of that, we kind of have to arm ourselves against our darker side. We have to understand that there are monsters. We need to arm ourselves against the monsters, whether they're our own monsters or someone else's monsters. So I absolutely am in support of arming yourself or doing whatever we have to do to preserve our way of life." End quote. Cleveland Institute of Art. This small school was first established in 1882, when it was chartered as the Western Reserve School of Design for Women. The school expanded to cater to both sexes later on. Today, the campus contains the George Gund Building, a newer structure constructed in 2015, and the Joseph McCullough Center for Art, the classroom and studio space that was once a Ford assembly plant. Overall, it seems like a cool campus. Loveland Frogman. I'm not sure what this entry is doing this low on the iceberg. I'd heard of the cryptid far before I began research for this video. The first sighting of the Frogman occurred in 1955, when a traveling salesman said that he saw 3 frog-like creatures on the side of the road on the banks of the Little Miami River. The salesman kept on driving, deciding he'd rather be safe than sorry. The next publicized encounter took place in 1972, in which 2 Loveland cops reported seeing an animal that matched the description of the frogmen seen by the businessmen. Ray Shockey, one of the officers in sight, said that the creature was around 4 feet tall and had leathery skin. Shockey said that it crouched in a pose similar to a frog, then stood and hiked the guardrail towards the river. The most recent major sighting happened in 2016. A local resident named Sam Jacobs and his girlfriend were playing Pokemon Go near Lake Isabella. He claimed to have seen a huge humanoid frog creature that stood up and waded through the water. He took photos and sent them directly to the local news station. Moses Cleveland. Born in 1754 in Connecticut, Cleveland studied law at Yale and then served in the Revolutionary War as a Continental Army captain. Cleveland would lead an expedition into the Ohio wilderness after America won its independence. He surveyed the land and negotiated with the Native Americans about the purchase of new territory. He arrived at the mouth of the Cuyahoga River in July 1796. He and his team laid out a town plan for capital before they headed back to Connecticut, and he would pass away before the city was founded. In 1888, the Early Settlers Association would erect a statue of Cleveland on the same spot where he plotted the public square of the city of Cleveland. Eliot Ness. Ness was the head of a 9-man team called the Untouchables, a group of law officers who were in direct opposition to Al Capone's crime network within the city of Chicago during the Prohibition era. Ness would put Capone behind bars and would go on to serve in Ohio, in the cities of Cleveland and Cincinnati. He stayed in Cincinnati for a few weeks and then was picked to go on to Cleveland. Cleveland in the 30s was considered the most dangerous city in the U.S., with widespread corruption present within its police department. Ness would become the city's youngest head of public safety at age 32, commanding the police, fire, and traffic departments of the city. He got cars for the police patrols and gave them two-way radios, and opened a police academy and a welfare bureau. He would help convict 6 high-ranking policemen who were successfully charged with taking bribes from the city's underworld, and would stop many union protection rackets. By 1940, Cleveland had been voted the safest city in America for 2 years in a row. Ness would draw some heat for his actions during the Cleveland Torso murders, but I'll save that story for another entry that is deeper within the iceberg. Ness would leave Cleveland in 1942 and move on to D.C. Ohio is the most American state. This 2015 poll is from the blog of Hastily, a real estate site, so take it for what it's worth. The poll said that Ohio was the second most American state, after Iowa. A few of the parameters for establishing the most American state were the amount of bald eagles per square mile recorded, the number of astronauts born within its confines, amount of fast food places per square mile, and, among other things, Google searches for Bin Laden dead. Hastily took its sources from a variety of other sites. Either way, it's funny that this entry's title didn't correlate to the results. John A. Roebling Suspension Bridge. This bridge connecting Cincinnati and Covington, Kentucky, first opened to traffic in 1866. It spanned for 1,057 feet, making it the longest bridge in the world at that time. Bottlegate. This event, similar to 10-cent beer night, began in a December 2001 game between the Cleveland Browns and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Browns made a first down catch in the last 48 seconds of the game, while the score was 15-10 in the Jaguars' favor. The call was reversed, and Browns fans began to pelt the field with beer bottles and trash. Ohio is the setting of the Fear Street novels. This fictitious series takes place in the fictional town of Shadyfield, in the fictional state of Ohio. This book series by R.L. Stine tells the story of the town over a span of 300 years. There's actually a town of around 4,000 people called Shadyside in East Ohio, but it has a low crime rate and no recorded supernatural events. Nanotyrannus. The only major connection I found between this baby T-Rex and Ohio was the following 2019 article from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. A fossil hunter from Kansas has listed a young, estimated 4 years old, Tyrannosaurus rex fossil for sale to the highest bidder on eBay. This has ignited a fire among the scientific community, which believes a skeleton as rare as this is invaluable for research and the understanding of life on Earth 65 million years ago. End quote. In the end, The bidder listed the fossil on eBay for almost $3 million. This whole situation sparked arguments in the scientific community, as many questioned the morals of selling a piece of natural history in this way. Yellow Creek Massacre. This event happened in the Upper Ohio River in the Ohio Territory in 1774. Several Native Americans of the Mingo tribe were taken out by a group of Virginian frontiersmen on April 30th, 1774. Cherokee tribesmen had stolen the horses of a settler living in the area and taken out a couple of employees who were working for a trading company. Tensions grew in this portion of the frontier. A group of frontiersmen, called the Rangers, declared war on the Native Americans and took out a group of Shawnee and another separate group of Mingo. This provoked a war between the settlers and the formerly peaceful Mingo and Shawnee tribes. Paynesville. This town was known for its promotion of anti-slavery values and for being a major stop on the Underground Railroad, the network that allowed slaves to escape to the north. There are multiple stories of slave hunters that entered the town's limits, only to be promptly disarmed and kicked out. The city had a large African American and Mormon population, and both groups worked to establish networks with other anti-slavery advocates and the free communities up in Canada. Causid Bates House. The pioneer Causid settled near present-day University Circle in Cleveland. Causid was a civil engineer who was repeatedly involved with rescuing escaped slaves. The home is now a museum dedicated to the Underground Railroad. Serpent Mound State Memorial. This burial mound is best known for its distinctive serpentine shape that can be viewed best from above. A tower in the memorial allows visitors to get a great view of the overall structure. It stretches for around a quarter mile and faces westward. It's around 1,000 years old and was created by the Mississippi culture. The tail is a perfect spiral, and the head is an abstract shape that has been interpreted variously as a sun, an unblinking eye, an egg, and even a frog by archaeologists and anthropologists. The design was made of clay, ash, and stone. The serpent looks out over the rim of a 4-mile-wide formation in the ground that was made by either a meteor strike or a below-ground explosion sometime in the distant past. Ohio is the 48th state. Ohio was the 17th state admitted into the U.S. in 1803 by the government. However, Congress forgot to approve the new Ohio Constitution in its documents. Ohio's legislation for its statehood was made 150 years later, in 1953. Some Ohioan school teachers realized the issue, and soon an Ohio congressman named George H. Bender introduced a piece of legislation in order to make Ohio a state. Ohio Anti-Slavery Society. 2 major societies dedicated to this purpose were located in the state, and were called, respectively, the Cleveland and Cuyahoga Anti-Slavery Societies. The 2 societies pushed a petition with 2 points around the state. The first was to repeal the state's black laws, legislation that restricted the movement and freedom of African Americans, among other things. The other point called for a law to protect every citizen's rights, and a means to put an end to kidnapping within Ohio. Franklin Castle. You know, I'm starting to wonder if the creator of this iceberg knows something about Cleveland. The Franklin Castle was constructed on the north side of Franklin Boulevard between the years 1881 and 1883. Franklin Boulevard was an upscale part of the city, second only to Euclid Avenue. It was built by Tiedemann, a German immigrant, and served as a place for him and his family to live, who were slowly coming to the U.S. from Europe. Tiedemann would sell the house in 1896, before he passed away. The house saw many owners, and later became a German singing club. The club left in 1968, and rumors began to spread that the members of the club had witnessed multiple supernatural events. Tiedemann had suffered the loss of 4 children and his wife over the course of his stay in the home, and it's said that their spirits still inhabit Franklin Castle. Polish girl. This is a specialized variant of the Polish boy. I couldn't find any information on what exactly distinguishes the two. Collinwood Fire. Similar to the hospital fire, this event served as a wake-up call to the nation. I've noticed a theme. Ohio seems to have multiple fire-related incidents that go on to inspire the rest of the U.S. to reform some ecological or safety standard. It was March 4th, 1908. The Collinwood School caught fire when a furnace in the boiler room of the school ignited dry wood in the building structure. The structure erupted in flames, causing 179 fatalities. This event led to the coating of schools. Iron staircases, concrete floors, fireproof coverings on pipes, and enclosed stairwells were just some of the safety measures that came out of the event. Cleveland Institute of Art helped make Disney's Pinocchio. The CIA made the original Pinocchio movie. You can quote me on that. The Cleveland Institute of Art, that is. Many graduates of this school would go on to work in Disney in the 1930s. Graduates helped animate effects, create the colors of the films, and design the art of Jiminy Cricket. Ohio Giants. The most famous case relating to this entry goes as follows. Everhart was an archaeologist who excavated the Serpent Mound in the 1800s. He claimed to have discovered a rock covered in hieroglyphs that contained lettering from Greek, Etruscan, and Phoenician, along with the skeletons of 8 to 9.5 foot tall humanoids. However, Everhart's crew would later testify that the discovery was a hoax, saying that Everhart had carved hieroglyphs into the rock himself and hadn't taken accurate measurements of the skeletons. The idea of giants who predate human civilization has been a recurring element of many stories surrounding the burial mounds of Ohio and throughout the rest of America. However, archaeologists and anthropologists have repeatedly debunked these claims. The Circleville Letters. Mary Gillespie had been cheating on her husband, and whoever had written the letter to her knew about it. Mary received an anonymous letter in the mail in 1977. It read, "I've been observing your house, and I know you have children. Stay away from Massey." Massey was a superintendent of a local school who had an affair with Mary. The letters soon arrived addressed to her husband. Mary's husband, Ron, received a note in which the writer told him of her affair and told Ron to take her and Massey out while they were together. Ron waited, and soon the writer threatened to call CBS. Soon, a call arrived for Ron. Ron picked it up, answered the phone, put it back down, and then grabbed his .22 cal revolver and went out the door. He told his daughter that he was going to go find the writer. Ron's truck slid off the road while he was in transit, and a fatal impact with a tree took him out. His gun had been fired once. Mary was now a widow. In 1983, Mary saw a handmade sign on the side of the road while she was taking kids to school. Mary worked as a school bus driver. The sign was specifically addressed to her 12-year-old daughter and claimed that her daughter had been meeting up with Superintendent Massey. Mary pulled down the sign, which was tied to a box. She took the box home and found a booby trap attached to a loaded gun, which had failed to go off. The authorities took the gun and were able to recover its serial number. Investigation revealed that the weapon belonged to Paul Freshour, Mary's brother-in-law. He was convicted in 1984, but the letters kept showing up. The Gillespie's were not the only people in Circleville, Ohio, who had been receiving letters. Residents throughout the town had been also getting these letters. They continued throughout the years, only ceasing in 1994 when Freshour was released from jail on parole. The case has still remained unsolved. Howe riots. These occurred from the 18th to the 24th of July in 1966. They began when a white bar owner denied an African-American customer a glass of water at the 79ers Cafe on the corner of Howe Avenue and East 79th Street. This caused riots in the neighborhood, and vandalism and looting began. The National Guard was quickly called in, and 4 African Americans were mortally wounded and then passed away. 2 were innocent bystanders hit by crossfire. 1 was taken out by an assailant while waiting for a bus, and the last occurred in a case of self-defense. Over 30 were injured, and over 300 members of the community were arrested. Kirtland was the site of the first Mormon temple. This is self-explanatory. This temple was completed in 1836 by members of the LDS Church. One interesting architectural feature of the building interior was that the temple had nearly identical first and second floors, with the first floor dedicated to services and the second to training priests. Melonheads. I covered multiple versions of this legend in the Connecticut State Iceberg. The Ohio versions are largely identical to the Connecticut versions. Stories say that the Melonheads were either the results of a horrible science experiment or the offspring of a group of children who were left on their own after a kindly doctor assigned to take care of them passed away. Their offspring are said to inhabit the area south of Kirtland in northeast Ohio. Kent State anti-war protest. A group of students were at the Kent State campus protesting the Vietnam War on May 4th, 1970. Nixon was in office at the time, and one of the things he had promised in his run was that he would quickly bring an end to the war. However, in April 1970, the U.S. invaded Cambodia and widened the front in Southeast Asia. The students within Kent had been protesting for a couple of days by the time the National Guard was called in. They set the campus ROTC building on fire on the evening of May 2nd. Guardsmen in the area and protesters continued to fight throughout the night. Over 1,000 guardsmen arrived on site by the 3rd, and they swiftly occupied the zone. The situation calmed down, and students were seen chatting amicably with the soldiers. James Rhodes, the Ohio governor, arrived in town and began to make the situation even worse. He claimed that every force of law would be brought down to stop the protests, and said that he would seek a court order to issue a state of emergency. Many in the Guard, and among the staff at the university, took this to mean that a state of martial law was being declared, and it was assumed by some powerful individuals within these groups that all gatherings were banned. The fights began again. A confrontation broke out, and a group of guardsmen were stranded and surrounded by protesters on the 3rd. They fired tear gas to disperse the crowd and drew back. However, 28 of the 70 men fired their loaded weapons in an attempt to drive the crowd back even further. Many pointed at the air and the ground, but several fired point blank into the crowd, causing 4 fatalities and wounding 9 other students. This immediately drew backlash from many throughout America, and further contributed to many people's negative perception of the war in Vietnam. Fairport Lighthouse. This lighthouse, located in Fairport Harbor at the mouth of the Grand River, was first illuminated in 1925. Script, Ohio was first made by Michigan. You heard me right. The legends are in fact reality. The script Ohio, one of the formations used by the Buckeyes marching band, was first performed by the Michigan marching band. The Michigan band, either in a gesture of respect or a means of showing dominance, spelled out Ohio in script to the accompaniment of the OSU fight song on October 15, 1932. Ohio saw the formation and then made a script of their own, which was performed for the first time around 4 years later. School poisoning tragedy in Caledonia, Ohio. This place was once a munitions handling site during the Second World War. It was one of the largest receiving and staging areas for weapons and material headed overseas during the war. Toxic chemicals were used in munitions storage and transport, along with radioactive material used in specialized equipment. These materials were improperly disposed of on the site. 30 years later, the site was the location of the new River Valley High School. The school was constructed in the 1960s, and the excavation disturbed the contaminants concealed by the earth. In 1997, the State Department of Health would begin an investigation of soil in the area, finding arsenic, lead, and other horrible substances in the earth. However, they failed to link these findings to the health issues reported by many attending and working at the school. In 1999, the Army Corps of Engineers found cancer-causing chemicals on the athletic fields, but officials failed to do anything to help. The school was eventually moved to another site in 2003, and the whole event remained undocumented up until a 2021 book published by a researcher named James von Kierden. Matt Maupin. This entry and the last one came out of left field. I really applaud the Iceberg author for giving me the privilege to talk about these super obscure stories that affected a lot of families. Maupin was a 20-year-old private first class who was captured by enemy forces on the 9th of April, 2004. His fuel convoy, part of the 724th Army Transportation Company, was ambushed in an area west of Baghdad. He went missing, and soon the insurgent TV network called Al Jazeera broadcast a tape of Maupin sitting on the floor while surrounded by masked men. Maupin was promoted to specialist and then sergeant, while his fate remained unknown. His parents continued to request the military to keep his status as missing/captured. In 2008, an informant tipped the military off about the locations of Maupin's remains. They were found roughly 15 miles northwest of Baghdad by a patrol from the 21st Infantry Regiment. Eugene the Mummy. It was 1929, and a dead drifter had been embalmed by the people of Sabina and made into a roadside attraction. This man died of natural causes outside of the town. The locals embalmed him and put him on display with the intent to try and identify him. Over 1.5 million people would go to see this man, referred to as Eugene, over the course of 4 decades. The town put him to rest, and his identity was never uncovered. The Ohio Grassman. This Ohio variant of the cryptid known as Bigfoot is different from the average Bigfoot in a couple of ways. It's said to live in grass huts in the deep wilderness, and loves to harass rural farmers, often destroying or kidnapping their livestock. The Watchman of Lake Hope Furnace. Now located within Lake Hope State Park, this furnace operated from 1854 to 1874. Its job was to process iron ore that was gathered from local sandstone bedrock. Watchmen tended the furnace fires in the night watch, ensuring that production continued. One watchman, continuing to do his job in a ferocious storm, was struck by lightning and fell into the furnace. The legend goes that this individual continues to complete his rounds on some nights. The lantern he carried on his rounds can sometimes be seen floating at the top of the Lake Hope Furnace. The disappearance of Beverly Potts. This 10-year-old girl was last seen walking to Halloran Park in the west side of Cleveland in 1951. Her body was never found despite multiple searches from the local authorities and groups of volunteers. A recent break in the case occurred in 2015, when an anonymous caller gave undisclosed and, according to the police, accurate information about her disappearance. However, nothing has come of the case since then. The Ridges. This location was originally called the Athens Lunatic Asylum and opened for the first time in 1874. It was intended to be the bleeding edge of mental health treatment facilities. It was part of the Kirkbride Plan, which called for mental institutions to be surrounded by beautiful landscaping and have facilities for outdoor exercise and other activities. 3 institutions in Athens, Dayton, and Columbus were built. The asylum ended up treating far more patients at a time than was originally intended by the founders, with it reaching a population of over 1,800 patients by 1950. Lobotomies, hydrotherapy, and shock treatment were just a few of the procedures used here. The complex was closed in the 1980s and later given to Ohio State, who are renovating the structure for other uses. Cleveland Torso Murderer. In 1934, Cleveland was in the midst of the Great Depression. A series of atrocious murders had occurred. Multiple people had been found decapitated throughout the Kingsbury Run section of the city. This area, bordered on the north by Woodland Avenue and delineated by Broadway Avenue in the south, was a dangerous place in the 30s. Nicknamed the Hobo Jungle by some police, Kingsbury Run bordered the Roaring Third, a precinct home to some of the most severe criminal activity in the city. 13 people were found in this area, with their bodies brutally disfigured between 1934 and 1938. Every one of these murders were brutal, and the public continued to gather in large numbers to watch the police recover the dead. In the end, Eliot Ness ordered the shanty towns of the district to be evacuated and then burned, after countless man-hours of fruitless investigation, which put a stop to the murders. The case remains unsolved to this day. Utopia, Ohio. This community was founded in 1844 by a French philosopher named Charles Fourier. He believed that all work and profit generated by this community should be shared equally by Utopia's residents. As you might imagine, this experiment would go perfectly. His followers built a giant communal building that included over 30 rooms and multiple private apartments. The community lasted around 2 years, as the residents couldn't bring in enough income and had a lot of trouble working with each other. The complex was sold to John Otis Wattles, the leader of a spiritualist group. This movement wanted to connect to the spiritual realm as best as they could by isolating themselves from the rest of the world. Wattles had the entire building moved by his group to the edge of a body of water, 1 brick at a time. The group gathered for a celebration on the night of December 13th, 1847, in their new home. A flash flood occurred while they were partying, and 150 of the 156 members of the commune drowned. Wattles survived and lived in ignominy. Today, Utopia, Ohio, is a tiny unincorporated settlement with a single general store. There's a historical marker that tells of the story of the 2 groups that lived here, along with the underground church where the Wattles group met to practice their religion. I should clarify, you can still see the underground church. It's not part of the historical marker. You can find it 40 miles outside of Cincinnati, off of Route 52. Helltown. Boston Village became a prosperous center of paper production in the early 18th century, and the industry brought tons of jobs and increased the size of the community. However, President Ford gave the National Park Service permission to take land for new national parks in the 70s, and Boston Village was selected as part of this initiative. Boston Village was soon reduced by government regulations and rapidly bought up by the government during the Ford administration. The residents were forced to leave, access to the town was removed, and Boston Village earned a new nickname, Helltown. As you might imagine, Helltown generated a lot of urban legends between these events and the ominous name of the town. The park plan was scrapped, and the area remained abandoned. A chemical dump was discovered in the area in 1985, and the park rangers would spend decades trying to restore the site. One legend says that the chemical spill caused mutations in a python that had been left behind by a resident, causing it to grow to a length of 30 feet. It's also said that an abandoned Presbyterian church in the area is still used for satanic rituals. There's also an abandoned bus in the village that is supposedly inhabited by the ghosts of a group of children who were taken out by an unknown killer. Crybaby Bridge. A lot of Midwestern states share this legend. Crybaby bridges are places where infants are said to have passed away, resulting in a place where ghostly cries can be heard late at night or in the early morning hours. Ohio has lots of the bridges, so much so that one resident over at the My Strange and Spooky World blog has made this map outlining every county in the state that has a Crybaby Bridge story. These are outlined in highlighter, with the ones in black dots having multiple Crybaby bridges, tunnels, hills, or cemeteries. There's a lot of them in Ohio, and I'll name a few real quick. There's Crybaby Hill, Crystal Springs Bridge, Fudge Road Bridge, Alliance Bridge, Mary Jane's Bridge, Palmer Road Bridge, Cable Train Overpass, Brubaker Road Covered Bridge, Gore Orphanage Road Bridge, and many, many others. This tier is a place where I add a few of my own entries that were not included in the iceberg. This won't cover every cool entry about the state, but will include some others that were left out. Harambe. I was surprised that this entry was nowhere on the iceberg, so I had to include it. This is relatively popular, so I will do my best to stick to the key points of what happened. A 3-year-old child fell into a gorilla enclosure in May 2016. Harambe, a western lowland gorilla, began to drag the little boy around. A zoo worker, fearing what would happen, took out Harambe with a single shot. The boy escaped without any serious injuries. The event was captured in a video that gathered millions of views in a short period of time. This started a debate over zoo welfare and if the employee should have used lethal force on the gorilla. However, Harambe became an internet meme. The outrage expressed by some was quickly made into a series of memes that became some of the most popular of 2016. Cornhenge. Titled Field of Corn with Osage Oranges, this art piece is more colloquially known as Cornhenge. The sculpture is made out of 109 ears of corn that are placed in row patterns. Each is 6 feet and 3 inches tall. This whole sculpture was made by the winner of a contest in Dublin, Ohio. Malcolm Concran, professor of sculpture at Ohio State University, won the competition with his concept, one that called upon Dublin's history as a farming community. His sculpture was completed over the course of a year, and was dedicated on October 30th, 1994. Gates of Hell. Columbus hasn't had a lot of coverage so far in this iceberg, so I'm here to remedy that with this entry. The gates of hell are located behind a Tim Hortons in Columbus. This drainage tunnel, also called Blood Bowl, can be entered through a stylized hellmouth. Many skateboarders have wiped out in the depths of the tunnel, giving it that nickname of Blood Bowl. It's also said that a skateboarder passed away in the tunnels sometime in the 1980s. The tunnel runs under High Street and is covered in graffiti, including this ominous figure. You can find it in a ravine behind the Tim Hortons, located at 2754 North High Street in Columbus. Just be warned that the tunnel is considered off-limits to the public. Longaberger Basket. I'm glad I found this entry. This one's pretty unique. This basket-shaped building in Newark was once the headquarters of the Longaberger Company, and was designed by the CEO in the exact image of his favorite product from his company. Let me read you some stats about its construction from a Road Trippers article. The 180,000 square foot, 7-story basket has a 30,000 square foot atrium topped with a glass ceiling. The basket's 150-ton handles, which took 18 months to construct, contain a special heating element to keep ice from forming and potentially crashing through the roof in the winter. Two 725-pound, 25 feet wide gold leaf tags are attached to each long side of the building. End quote. This $30 million building was owned by the company from 1997 to 2017. The company sold it as their sales began to decline. There was originally a plan to turn the basket into a hotel, but the pandemic crushed that idea. The current owner of the building is currently working to restore it and has plans for it. My City Was Gone. This track by the band The Pretenders was released in 1984 as part of the album Learning to Crawl. This song is about Akron, the hometown of Chris Hind, the lead singer of the band. Hind grew up in Akron in the 70s, and the town had a vibrant rock scene, with bands like Devo and the Bizarros regularly performing there. She went on to relocate to Britain, and came back to Akron in the 80s. Hind was disappointed that the place she once knew had been replaced with something far less familiar. Shopping malls and parking lots occupied places she had grown up with, and the town felt far more tame. She said the following about her town in an interview. Everything's just huge masses of granite blocks, and everything's outsized. It might look good on a drawing, but the scale doesn't fit human life. Alright, that is all for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to support me further, check out some of the other videos I've made or support me through the links in the description. Take care, and good night.